answers and closing remarks on ECOSOCC Secretary. Thank you, merci, muito obrigada, siabonga, gracias.
Okay.
We're going to start with the welcome remarks of Honorable Stephane NGOMAT.
Okay, thank you very much. Honorable Mr. Patson Malisa, Deputy Presiding Officer South for the African Union ECOSOCC. Honorable Petronella Kagonye, former Minister of Labor and Social Affairs, of Social Welfare, Member of Parliament of Zimbabwe. Honorable Madame Nkosazana Ndlovu, Board Member of African 55 State Initiative. Honorable members of the Standing Committee of the African Union ECOSOCC, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Allow me first of all to extend to you, on behalf of the ECOSOCC Peace and Security Cluster and on my own behalf, a cordial welcome to the e-Caravan of Peace webinar in Southern Africa. I take this opportunity to express my heartfelt thanks for your interest in peace and security in the region by responding to our invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks the 4th steps of our e-Caravan since it was launched on the 1st of September in Rabat in Morocco. After North Africa, Central Africa, and East Africa, today the e-Caravan is in Southern Africa. This e-Caravan of Peace is a solidarity event aimed at rallying all the stakeholders in order to participate in humanitarian action in the service of peace. This caravan aims also to convey a message of peace, sympathy, and solidarity between all the segments of African population, and also promote the African Union 2020 Team of the Year, which is silencing the guns, creating conducive conditions for Africans' development. Ladies and gentlemen, since 2017, September of each year is proclaimed as the Amnesty Month in Africa. It is in this perspective and in line with its mandate to support policies and programs that promote peace, security, and stability in Africa that the Peace and Security Cluster of ECOSOCC, or Union ECOSOCC, whose I have the honor to chair, launched the e-Caravan of Peace for the entire month of September under the theme Month of Amnesty for the surrender and collection of illicit arms and light weapons, a gateway to silence the guns in Africa, with a main outcome to encourage and provide an opportunity to African citizens in illegal possession and use of arms to voluntarily surrender them without any repercussion to designated state institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, although we all know that the most stable region in Africa is Southern Africa, but still Southern Africa is not immune to challenges to peace and security, in which armed conflict, political crisis, and instability are some urgent issues contributing to state and human insecurity in Southern Africa. Since November 2017, violent extremists have carried out brutal attacks on villages in the Cabo Delgado province in Mozambique, with some of them claiming to be radical Islamic, creating the condition of Islamic extremist hotspot zone in the country and causing the loss of thousands of lives and displaced since the beginning of the insurgency. We want to take this opportunity to strongly condemn those heinous and coward acts and express our continuous solidarity with the people and government of Mozambique and reaffirm them our full support to the ongoing effort to combat terrorism and violent extremism in the country. There is also a need for renewed effort to strengthen inter-African cooperation in the fight against terrorism and violent extremism. The Peace and Security Cluster of ECOSOCC is also concerned about the reports of disproportionate use of force, the increase of violence and insecurity in Zimbabwe, and calls for the consolidation of a climate of peace, security, stability, and democracy in the country through dialogue and consultation between all segments of the population for peace to reign. We also encourage the people and leadership of Zimbabwe to preserve in their endeavor to consolidate democracy and promote tolerance in their country. Ladies and gentlemen, AU-ECOSOCC Peace and Security Cluster would like to launch a strong call for a lasting peace in all conflict zones in Southern Africa in order to give a real chance to dialogue and negotiation. It's also necessary to stress that Africa must be a stakeholder in the search for a solution of peace in all conflict zones in Africa. I therefore take the opportunity as well of our meeting today to salute the appreciable effort that the African Union and government of Southern African region has continued to deploy with a view of helping a peaceful, consensual, and lasting peace solution in Southern African region, such as in Lesotho, Angola, Madagascar, and other countries of the region. In conclusion, I would like to express our solidarity with all the countries that are victims of terrorism and instability. I therefore declare open the webinar of the e-Caravan of Peace in Southern Africa in commemoration of the African Amnesty Month. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Stephane Ngomate. Thank you very much. Just to inform everyone that we're going to have a French translation. So thank you very much. Now, Mr. Keynote Address, Honorable Patson Malisa, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Chairperson for Peace and Security, the Honorable Stephane Ngomate. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this very historic e-Caravan, the very first of its kind within the African Union, as well as in ECOSOCC's history. And therefore, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today is a special day for us in the Southern African region, as this e-Caravan hosted by the Peace and Security Cluster of ECOSOCC is playing a critical focus on the status of peace and stability in our region. The year 2020 being the African Union Year of Silence and Guns, this Amnesty Month carries with it a twofold duty. It carries the target expectation of our collective development plan as per Agenda 2063, in which Africa envisaged to have silenced guns in this year, while at the same time calling all parties to the full acknowledgement of the principles of political and socio-economic emancipation for the African people as per aspiration for Agenda 2063. This binary revelation is a very crucial part to our discussions today, as the matters of peace and security in the Southern African region are not being contested by wars in the conventional forms which we are used to hearing. Rather, the peace and security issues are matters of political and socio-economic threats in ensuring the peaceful administration of a dignified living for all. Political violence in the region is stimulated by the growing impatience of the people with service delivery returns, as well as the enabling of growing markets for better job and business opportunities. The same paradigm has made terrorism a real threat in our region, as recruitment into militant groups in the name of taking control of economic resources is occurring at an unfortunate rate, as seen in popular media. We are also seeing crimes of theft, heists, and other hostile takeovers of economic resources on the rise, and thus the creating of itself a war between the people and the criminals and perpetrators of these. Now, usually I'm a very unbiased person, but today I'm going to exercise a bias in saying that the most critical of these, in my view, is the vulnerability of the women and children in these circumstances. Whether it be the threats aforementioned or domestic violence, women and children are the forefront of victimization in this paradigm. And in these perpetrations, guns and firearms are at the center of the implementation.
May the other panelists please mute because we are having a little bit of echoing and we hardly can hear Mr. Patson.
Thank you very much. It's therefore my passion and my hope that in our bid to have peace and security restored, we place as a main priority the protection and empowering of our women and children to be active participants in the determination of their future. And in so doing, making them leading change agents in the national peace and reconciliation efforts. This is why today in our panel, we strive to make it an all women and youth panel so that we can have the voice, the main stakeholders for which we plan and participate in policy and development. While they are professionals and legends in their own right, I trust their passion and experience with regard to the realities on the ground of Southern Africa's plight in order to join hands with the rest of the continent in building the Africa in which guns are silent and the women and youth are at the central stage in the development of our beloved continent. In producing Amnesty Month, the African Union is promoting the cultivation of atmospheres of dialogue and earnest examination into the areas of conflict of which the gun cannot fix, but rather dedicated and consistent effort towards the lifting of the poverty line and protecting the rights of every human within our borders. It's through this that we will resolve the inner disgruntlement with the inability to manifest our full potentials in society. This Amnesty Month, may we therefore continue to wear the pride of our history of liberation and use the lessons of today to produce an Africa that our descendants can pursue their paths in peace and in hope. With this, I wish you wonderful discussions and look forward to the practical implementations of the outcomes set therein. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Patson Malisa. And we have our first speaker, Ms. Thandie Nhlengethwa. I don't know if I pronounced it right. Welcome, Madam Thandie.
Thank you, Chairperson, Moderator. You should actually be able to pronounce my surname, being my neighbor in the region. Madam Moderator, could you kindly please repeat that people should mute their mics? I still see some people who don't have muting. And I could hardly hear what TPO South was saying because there was too much competition with the mic. I see Mr. Eliezer Komat, your mic is not muted. Would you kindly please do that? Thank you.
Kindly.
First of all, let me express my excitement to be part of the panel that's presenting today. And thank you very much to Chairperson Peace and Security Cluster, Stephane, and thank you to TPO, our regional TPO, who's working very hard to make sure that the region really shines. And Mr. Stephane, you are doing a great job. You, among the chairpersons, I don't know if there is any other chairperson who's working, but your work is obvious. You have rounded the entire continent by region, and I think you didn't allow COVID to stall you and make you incapable of doing your work. So if there was another chance for you to go back to to the GA for the next fourth GA, unfortunately, your term and my term will be over. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I've already been introduced. I'm Thandie Nhlengethwa in Eswatini. I think we've posted our brief resumes to the chairperson. I bring you all, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from the representatives for Southern Africa in the General Assembly of the African Union, ECOSOCC organ. This year's Amnesty Month serves as a call to the conscience of the leadership and community of the Southern Africa region to deliver both physical and spiritual amnesty. Being the home to the youngest independent nations of Africa, Southern Africa are still at the crossroads of determining the identity of our nations within the continental and global spaces. In terms of post-independence conflicts, we have had two notable civil wars in the Angolan and Mozambican territories, which have thankfully been resolved in the turn of the century. This therefore leaves the conflict points of the region in the unpredictability of economic stagnation and regression, which result in inequality, poverty, and unemployment. Gender-based violence in the domestic setup also prevails as a consistent threat to our peace. These threats to our democracy in the forms of socio-economic challenges have resulted in numerous incidents of political violence as a result of civil insurrections against government policy, as well as rise in violent crimes. I think all of us, as I say this, our minds are going wide to appreciate where these violences are taking place. The inevitable main victims of both instances are usually women and children. That's our approach in the Southern Africa region to silencing the guns having to be of a multi-dimensional nature. It is for this reason that we as a region have applied a strategy to ensure that at the helm of the drive to have peaceful and unconditional resolutions of conflict, women to be the central figures of the advocacy and mediation efforts of ECOSOCC in the region. This drive is led by our focal point national chapter of the Republic of Mozambique, which is our champion for Aspiration 4 of Agenda 2063. And Aspiration 4, as we maybe some of us may forget these aspirations, it speaks to a peaceful and secure Africa. So Mozambique adopted that aspiration from Agenda 2063. Through this chapter, we have held peace reconciliations programs in partnership with the government of Mozambique. This has also resulted in the formation of the joint platform of Women for Peace, Reconciliation and Economic Development, from which our moderator, Ms. Magui, is the executive director. This drive has been led by two successive leaders of the national chapter, who are both women. This blueprint is being implemented as per the appropriate adaptation within the region. The second aspect, which is notable, it's a notable success that has happened, and it is in the advocacy for ensuring good governance and joint collaboration of public and civil society in addressing the challenges of the socio-economic dynamics in the Kingdom of Eswatini, in my country. The national chapter being the regional chapter of Aspiration 6 of Agenda 2063. And the aspiration reads thus: an Africa where development is people-driven, unleashing the potential of its women and youth. That's the Eswatini chapter, ECOSOCC chapter, point of focus from Agenda 2063. In addition, it is also notable that the region's interaction with the African peer review mechanism, usually referred to as APRM, is spearheading this effort through the leadership of a woman with vast experience in tackling the effects of poverty and inequality in the health and basic delivery of diverse sectoral service. These are just two examples of the region's efforts towards tackling the main threats to peace and stability in the region. While there is a rising threat in the form of terrorism, this threat is centered on the intention to capture economic resources for the countries affected. It is therefore important that in the military interventions, the long-term strategies of our nations be focused on ensuring that, you'll excuse me, I had to print this because of the competition with the computer. Because the poverty line, make sure the poverty line is lifted and that basic living is dignified for every citizen. This will ensure that recruitment into generative activities will be difficult, as such recruits usually the product of unbearable living standards. They are usually products of unbearable living standards. We're talking about recruits into the army, and we know most of the guns are within the army in every country. But we also find illicit guns everywhere in civil society, even on the streets. We therefore reaffirm our dedication to working with the Peace and Security Cluster of African Union, ECOSOCC, towards ensuring constant interaction with the governments and peoples of the Southern region, so that we can indeed motivate and encourage the environment of peace and progress, with the elimination of the spirit of vengeance, so as to increase the changes of peaceful resolutions and restoration of the dignity of our women and children. We further call on all state and non-state actors in the region to support our efforts, as it is through our united efforts to define the identity and spirit of our region that we can produce a region where the guns are indeed silent. I thank you.
We can hear you. Can you unmute, sister? You're on silence mode.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about
Can you
that.
hear me now? I was saying thank you very much, Ms. Thandie, for the well address on the report activities on the Southern Africa region. And we have our next speaker, Honorable Petronella Kagonye. Is our next speaker. Honorable Petronella Kagonye.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone.
Hi,
Am I
good
visible
afternoon.
and audible now? Thank you very much.
Yes.
Let me also start by really appreciating being on the platform as one of the speakers. From the topic that I'm supposed to be presenting on, it's on government perspective on the implementation of the Amnesty month report activities from Southern Africa. However, when I spoke to the chairperson, I indicated that I'm ex-government official, so I'm just going to give a brief report from what I heard from government. Then I'm also going to focus on recommendations on peace and security in Southern Africa. From the discussions that we had from the AU-ECOSOCC Zim chapter, they've been successfully engaging with key stakeholders from the government side, especially the security service sector, that is the police force, the army, and the central intelligence departments. And government is 100% supportive of this initiative. They are fully behind every initiative However, from what was reported to me, because of the COVID-19, which really ravaged the entire world, nothing much has been done on the ground. The e-Caravan, thing that was supposed to be implemented, nothing much could be done because of the lockdowns that were taking place. However, I'm assured that the government has got 100% support towards this initiative. On my recommendations on peace security in Southern Africa, I heard the earlier presenter who mentioned about the instability that is going on in Zimbabwe in terms of some violence. They've been successfully engaged in lockdowns that were taking place. However, I'm assured that the government has got an earlier presenter who mentioned about the chapter. They've been successfully engaged that were taking place. However, I'm assured that Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So what I was saying is towards regarding the peace and security, Zimbabwe is one of the most peaceful countries, not only in Southern Africa, but in Africa as a whole. And this has been a result of two major issues. One, the Firearms Act, which actually centralized the firearms registration system in the country. So you find that in Zimbabwe, there are heavy penalties for unregistered firearms. It is very difficult for one to keep an unregistered firearm and go without being noticed. We have got a reliable policing system which can actually track firearms use and possession. And we also have mechanisms in place to make sure that all illegal firearms cannot be sold on the black market so easily. Even on our borders, we've got a border control unit section that is in place to ensure that we either eradicate completely the importation of illegal firearms, or at least we minimize to the least level that we can manage. I would also like to mention that government has set up a commission on peace and reconciliation, which focuses outside the arms. It focuses especially on the mindset shift to ensure that people are really decolonized from protecting or fighting using arms, but they fight using the mind through negotiations, through discussions, through engagement in various activities, and through reconciliations also. So I would like to recommend that over and above the e-Caravans initiative, we can also go by putting the relevant legislation in various countries in our continent to ensure that we reduce the level of illegal arms, and also that we engage on a social level, social platform, social engagement, and specifically deal with our minds, our shift in the mindset. I'm sure those two recommendations will go a long way as a continent to try and maintain the peace and stability within our region. That's all that I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Petronella Kagonye, for the government perspective on the implementation of Amnesty Month. Thank you very much. We have our next speaker, Madam Nkosazana Ndlovu.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm gonna speak English because I'm yet to learn French. I bring greetings for you to everybody from South Africa. My name is Nkosazana Ndlovu. I'm a qualified auditor by profession. I've worked in the public sector as well as the private sector as a professional auditor. I've also done security work in my career, as well as governance, and currently studying towards an LLB degree to become a lawyer in the future and an advocate for human rights and civil rights. I'm currently serving in a new organization, a civil rights movement for the entire African continent called Africa 55 States. I will unpack the activities of the organization in due course. To start off my talk today, I would like to say that Africa has experienced dozens of conflicts of a variety of issues during the past 2 decades. Responding to these conflicts requires concerted action to manage the crisis, the violence, political discord, and humanitarian consequences of prolonged fighting. It's also necessary to address the long-term social and economic impacts of conflict to rebuild communities, societies, and states that have been torn apart. To accomplish this requires the involvement of institutions and groups rarely considered in informal official African conflict management activities that include schools, universities, religious institutions, the media, commercial enterprises, legal institutions, civil society groups, youth, women, as well as migrants. These groups and organizations have an important role to play in building a sense of identity, fairness, shared norms, and cohesion between the state and society. All critical components of a fabric of peace and security that will allow Africa to coexist in a democratic way. But before I continue with my talk, I would like to highlight something that's very important for us to recognize. As much as it's important for us to recognize the issue of silencing of the guns for the effort of creating peace and stability, it's very critical to understand in the first place what has caused guns to find themselves in our society as the African continent. With that said, it's critical to understand that we need to create a situation where we have democratic states that allow the rule of law, democracy, constitutionalism, human rights, civil rights of all citizens. By creating a scenario where we have states that are run by the rule of law in a democratic environment, this allows our African states to thrive and therefore has a more stronger impact on our socio-economic issues. By allowing such an environment to thrive, we'll find that we'll have states that are more enabled to thrive even economically, and therefore less conflict and then therefore the less need of citizens to then take up arms to rebel against a state or to fight against each other. I always say, even in our own country, where we find ourselves in a situation where there's conflict between our own South African people as well as our African brothers and sisters, or who they are called foreign nationals in our country. I don't like to use that term, but for the purpose of illustrating the point, I always say one of the things that causes such enormous tensions that to take place is not so much because there is necessarily a hate between the two groups of South African locals and our African nationals in our own country, but it's caused by a situation where we find that some of our states have been in the past been economically mismanaged. It therefore causes a situation where it has an impact on a socio-economic impact, and therefore a direct impact on citizens, therefore having to find themselves scrambling for resources in foreign countries because they are forced to flee their countries due to the huge socio-economic impacts that are caused by all this instability in how we manage our states. By us, therefore, the long-term impact of us resolving directly these issues of strengthening institutions, strengthening democracy, strengthening the rule of law, and strengthening and having states that are constitutionally run. This has a long-term impact on civil society and therefore thriving economies. And therefore, by allowing that environment, we find that there'll be less conflict and better coexistence among citizens themselves. And therefore, we find our African people having less of a need to go to other shores to find a place of refuge because their own economies are stable and they are working. So before we deal with the situation in a bottom-up approach, I would like to think we need to deal with it from a top-bottom approach. So we then strengthen our own countries in terms of the rule of law, democracy, civil and human rights, institutions that work, where we find that the civil society, is able to function and have a voice even in terms of how the state is governed. Therefore, we find that by having that, by creating an environment of allowing the citizens to participate more actively in their democracy, in building that state, we therefore allow a situation where there is a strong and healthy relationship between the citizens and the states themselves. Therefore, for us as Africa 55 states, we believe that we want to foster a situation whereby our states are functioning better, they're functioning more coherently, and therefore by allowing that environment to thrive, we'll find that in the long term, there will be less need for all the conflict that happens in the continent itself. Therefore, our pillars as Africa 55 states is strengthening democracy, the rule of law, anti-corruption, civil society rights, and recognition of those rights, and the activation of those rights as well. And therefore, by allowing that, we allow our states and economies to thrive in the long term. Be that said, we believe that we would like to foster a relationship with the African Union via ECOSOCC by allowing ourselves to be part of the developing machinery of Africa to allow the peace and security to take place. And we believe that by doing that, we'll allow for national cohesion to take place by being active actors in the role that we'll play to mitigate between the states and the citizens themselves. And therefore, by doing that, we believe in the long term, it has a direct impact on a more thriving economic environment in each and every single state in the continent, and therefore allowing the more there are resources, the less conflict. And therefore, we believe that working together with the presiding officer, Mr. Dennis Corde, who is a chairman of Africa 55 states, it allows us the opportunity to foster strong relations between ourselves as a civil society organization for the entire continent, and as well directly with the African Union, to foster a situation where there's coherence amongst all the different states in the continent through the mother body being the African Union itself. Therefore, I would like to say that there's three pillars or three issues that we'd like to tackle firsthand that we have identified and that we believe that are critical for this project of silencing the guns and creating peace and security and stability in the continent. One is the issue of drugs and human trafficking, as well as sex slaves trade. We believe that we need to get into the root of what is happening with this crime. Is it the situation where we have weak borders? Is it a situation where we have foreign atrocities finding themselves in our African states? So by strengthening the rule of law in border control and border management and security in all our states, we therefore are able to mitigate a direct threat to our coexistence in terms of drugs that cause our children to become weakened, and therefore becomes a direct social threat to us as a continent, because once our youth get hooked on drugs, they no longer be able to partake in the developmental agenda of the continent, because our youth is the future. And then the next one is the issue of gender-based violence that we need to tap into and find out what is the root cause that is causing this to become more prevalent, specifically in our country, South Africa. And then last but not least, quite critically, is the issue of xenophobia. I know that in our own country, this has been quite a thorn for us for quite a long time. That has caused a lot of conflict between ourselves as South Africans, as well as the rest of our African brothers and sisters. Something very, very deep and very dear to my heart that needs to be tackled. And therefore, as Africa 55 states, we have taken upon ourselves to have a social cohesion conference.
We have 2 minutes left.
At a continental level, yes, at a continental level that allows us to foster relations between ourselves and the rest of the African continent by having a conference through dialogue, because we believe that the only way we can resolve this is through reconciliation, dialogue, peaceful coexistence, and unity and peace. And as a theme for the conference that we want to propose, to foster a relationship of working together and creating unity and finding out what is at the root cause of what affects us and cause this direct conflicts that our states are affected with. From a governmental point of view, our own country, South Africa, to control the issue of peace, instability, and security, we have a security committee in our parliament that deals with, where all political parties are actually represented, that deal with the different constituencies and talk to issues of security in each and every single province in our country. And then we have visible policing all the time to deal with the issue of security and the guns that have found themselves in through the borders into the country that we need to deal with. And then we have a gender-based violence committee as well that reports directly to our president to escalate that issue even to our national parliament. And coupled with that is new bills that have been formed by our government to deal with these issues directly. So there is commitment of our government to deal with all these atrocities, but mainly we feel strongly as Africa 55 states that we need to get to the root cause of all these issues and get to the bottom of what causes it, and then foster that working relationship with each and every single state as a solutions driver to ensure that we foster unity, peace, coexistence, while we recognize that democracy, constitutionalism, the rule of law will be ultimately be what will champion peace and security in the continent as we deal with all these issues that bedevil the continent in this manner. We want to foster a strong relationship through ECOSOCC as an advisory body to champion all these interventions that we believe that in the long run will allow us to be able to tackle this issue as we develop Africa further for the Africa that we want. Asante sana. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Ndlovu. Thank you for the presentation. Now we have our fourth speaker, Mr. Gustavo de Carvalho. And here it's allocated 10 minutes, but we're going to give you 15 minutes, Mr. Gustavo.
Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.
So you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, and I'm very much appreciate the opportunity from the Institute for Security Studies to share some thoughts here in this e-Caravan for Peace. And I wanted to particularly take a segue from the previous speaker, Madame Ndlovu, and a lot of the talks that she mentioned around the issues on understanding underlying roots of conflicts. And I think that it's essential for us when thinking around regional perspectives on peace and security in Southern Africa. Because I think that Amnesty Month is always a key opportunity for us to reflect how are we achieving our continental goals to silence the guns, not only because it's the theme of the year for the African Union, but particularly because it's a key milestone for the continent for a stable and prosperous future. And I think that it's always very important for us to think about. Because I wanted to start by stating this recurring theme in many of our presentations here today. The fact that Southern Africa is often seen as the most stable region in the continent should not be taken for granted. And I would like to highlight that. In our brief remarks, we would like to challenge a bit the idea of that we should not take for granted the fact that Southern Africa is the most stable region in the continent by highlighting some of the collective regional needs that we have in peace and security in the region with three focuses. One, the context of COVID-19 and the future of peace and security in the region after COVID-19, the emerging crisis in Mozambique, and the potential role that SADC plays in dealing with peace and security regions. And by we, I don't want to mean to say that I have multiple personalities. You will see there is two Gustavos as listed as panelists here, but the other one listed as Gustavo is my colleague Ringisai Chikohomero, which is a great, brilliant researcher from the ISS working in our Southern African project, and he will share some specific thoughts when it comes to developments in Mozambique, but particularly developments in terms of the role of SADC. I often describe COVID as a Russian doll, and because it's a crisis within a crisis, within a crisis, and so on. And there's multiple layers rather than being seen in isolation, they actually serve as a trigger that exacerbates existing political dynamics, particularly in terms of issues around root causes of conflicts. And I think the previous speaker really highlighted many of those issues. And that is an important test, and that matters for Southern Africa. Because for us, understanding these triggers is essential for us to understand what are our coping national and local mechanisms, and how much are they becoming stretched, and how much they're becoming undermined. Because at the end of the day, the longer this issue gets, the less ability to showcase resilience our region will have. Because resilience, which can simply be stated as the ability of absorbing shocks and being able to bounce back, is key when we look how countries and its institutions are able to respond to peace and security dynamics. And sadly, in the coming years, we should certainly expect to see more damaging prospects in terms of economic growth, potential social unrest, poverty, market disruptions, and losses of livelihood. And often these are some of the triggers that we have in terms of peace and security. Because the more we see there, the more we're going to start linking to other existing and potential conflict drivers. Whether we're talking about electoral relation violence, constitutional challenges, struggle over political hegemony, conflict over scarce resources, exploitation of identities, and particularly something that is sadly not in common in our region is the issue of violent extremism. Southern African actors, whether they are governments, civil society, or international organizations, have the responsibility to focus on addressing on those underlying causes of instability and violence, because they all remain there. Silencing the Guns initiative talks about that, which is a way in which of dealing with multi-layered opportunities to deal with long-term approaches. And that's for me what the Amnesty Month is about. Because the uncertain dynamics that we live now may generate a situation where we all become a bit more risk averse. Whether we are international organizations, we are partners, we are local governments, we're civil societies, we're national governments. Because Southern Africa shouldn't simply move away from what it's actually doing just because we have to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. Because the moment we do that, we're just trying to tick the boxes, or we're dealing with this idea of long-term goals that are always constrained by short-term realities. And this is what the COVID-19 crisis reflects. It is a new reality for sure. And while it impacts the existing dynamics on the ground, it should be responded as a means to assist with the ultimate goals in terms of silencing the guns in Africa, but in Southern Africa, which is to create sustainable conditions that enable countries to become more resilient to shocks, reducing the likelihood of instability and conflicts to emerge or re-emerge. That being said, I would like to the other Gustavo, which is not another Gustavo, but my colleague Ringisai, to finalize ISS's comments here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the interesting discussions that are ongoing. I'll just pick from what Gustavo was saying to share some thoughts as ISS as we're looking into this sub-region and what has been happening. As we move towards silencing the guns and as we celebrate this month. What is important is that the recent, not so recent developments in Mozambique that have been running for 3 years now are a litmus test for a number of instruments that have been put in place by SADC as a region, including the Mutual Defense Pact, including the region's anti-terrorism strategy that is yet to be implemented. And as Gustavo mentioned earlier on, Southern Africa has been celebrated for its stability and the lack of armed conflict. And this is a clear threat that behooves upon the collective. But what is interesting is the Mozambican dynamics require a much more nuanced analysis of the context of the root causes, the background, and possibly the trajectories that the conflict, the insurgents and terrorists are going to take. And it's one thing that on one hand, there's a potential of destabilizing the whole region and derailing the efforts towards the silencing the guns effort. On the other side, it's an opportunity for the region to step up and show its teeth in terms of the instruments that they can use. The biggest challenge for us as ISS in doing this analysis has been that there's a clear limited political will to engage. So say, for instance, the whole notion that an attack on one part of the region is an attack on the collective has not been really been realized, because for the last 3 years, the question of terrorist attacks in Cabo Delgado have been almost a Mozambican affair, where we know the modus operandi of these terrorists is they gain ground, and once they gain ground, they acquire more territory to establish their Islamist states. But there's been the situation has questioned the ability of SADC to work as a collective in instances of serious terrorist attack, and also the confidence that member states have in each other. That it has taken Mozambique 3 years to approach SADC with the crisis is indicative of, on one hand, a lack of confidence in what the collective can do, because at the same time, Mozambique has been approaching individual member states and has been hiring private security companies. Now, when you understand the whole trajectory of how terrorism destabilizes regions, once we begin to go the route of private security companies, we are creating an industry that needs to keep feeding. And there is a high likelihood that from such a thought process is likely to be creation of pseudo wars or pseudo insurgent fights around that, because there is now an industry for soldiers of fortune. What can be done is SADC really needs to rely on the instruments that it has, as well the responsibility, the Mutual Defense Pact and the SADC regional strategy on anti-terrorism to develop a twofold strategy. One which looks at the soft side of it, the intelligence and the developmental humanitarian circumstances that has made Cabo Delgado a fertile ground for insurgents. The second bit of it is the hardware, where you try to look at the model of military intervention that can be provided by a collective, looking at how we can provide support to the Mozambican state itself without having boots on the ground, as they say in the military. But this conundrum is so much speaking into the character of how SADC treats conflict within amongst its member states, where there's a lot of brotherhood and there's a lot of respect for sovereignty, to the extent that is detrimental to the stability of the region, without a clear responsibility to protect. And for us, this is a very important turning point and juncture in SADC's response to conflict and regional conflicts, that we call upon the AU, other regional blocs to put pressure on the SADC to build this collective response to the Mozambican crisis. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we have some comments on the chat from Mr. Gustavo. Perhaps I can share. He's Mr. Gustavo de Carvalho. He says, I think that part of the issue maybe is how we define peace. The moment, how we define peace. Sorry. I think that part of the defining peace simply through the existence of violent conflict, it maybe makes us shy away from the key root causes of conflict. This is a focus on coping mechanism. It shows that every country have different levels of fragility, formal or informal, and civil society. And we have another comment also from Dr. Juliana Kisimbi. It says, what I have seen leading to conflict, injustice or monetary, economic breakdown, marginalizations of certain constituents of the society, like the youth, where we saw the youth Arab uprisings, and finally militia or illegal paramilitary groups opposing government forces. And we have other few comments, but we'll go back to the our work program. Hello? And thank you very much for the presentation. And we have our next speaker, Mr. Glenn Fared, Executive Director of SCIDC, Council of NGOs. Is Mr. Fared? Hello? Mr. Glenn Fared? I don't think he's.
I think we can go to the next speaker, then you will come back.
We'll go to the next speaker. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Lindiwe Massinga. Dr. Lindiwe Massinga.
Hello.
You had 10 minutes, but we're going to give you 15 minutes since Mr. Fared did not make his presentation. So you have 15 minutes.
Okay, so I cut it in all kinds of ways to make it 10 minutes. Help me, Lord. Thank you very much to our moderator, Ms. Jambo, Excellencies, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly honored to address the perspectives of civil society organizations with regard to the implementation of the Amnesty report activities from Southern Africa. Can everyone hear me well? Yes, can everyone hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you.
Yes, we can, thank you.
So the initiative of the e-Caravan of Peace in this Amnesty Month for the surrender and collection of illicit small arms and light weapons throughout the continent of Africa is a valuable addition to the work performed, excuse me, by civil society organizations in the Southern African region, which in our view is plagued with armed conflicts of both small and large scale. It's interesting how different perspectives present different views from what they see about the situation in the region. As we have learned from the African Union's Peace and Security Council, as well as from my fellow panelists this morning, the proliferation and misuse of guns is a global pandemic that culminates in devastating outcomes. Small arms are readily available, they're easy to manage, and their cost is low. Hence, many people prefer to use them in conflicts and cause violence, and to an extent that contributes greatly to insecurities that are prevalent across Africa. Needless to say, the outcomes of these atrocities are devastating within each state and the Southern African region as well. The AU and other bodies have noted the strong correlation between small arms, light weapons, and A, transactional organized crime, B, illicit financial flows, C, illegal extortion of natural resources, and D, corruption, which are the main disruptors of the efforts made by civil society organizations. Therefore, we believe that the implementation of the African Union's policy framework, as well as the e-Caravan for Peace initiative, can help reduce and even eliminate the perpetration of a violent culture and militarization of our communities. Civil society groups welcome the action and believe that this practice promotes measurable goals of transparency, good governance, security, and enhanced accountability. Civil society organizations' perspectives. Civil society organizations in Southern Africa advocate for the measures geared to combat the illicit trade of small arms and light weapons to prevent crimes and violent deaths. Organizations such as Amnesty International state that the challenges posed by the proliferation of guns are catastrophic, and we in the Southern African region can attest to that. The widespread nature of armed conflicts calls for urgent actions by governments in the region to address the overwhelming patterns of gun violence that are destabilizing and demoralizing our communities. CSOs recognize that this dialogue has begun and wait with anticipation for action steps to be taken. According to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime data, over 1,000 people lose lives through violence from small arms. Strengthening cooperation among law enforcers and civil society will prevent further criminal activities. Amnesty International notes that small arms and light weapons facilitate human and drug trafficking, homicide, terrorism, and extortion. In this regard, the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs asserts that half of the global homicide cases are related to firearms. As such, small arms impede poverty eradication and hinder sustainable development efforts, which are the goals of every nation, not just in Southern Africa, but throughout the world. Let us consider two cases of civil society engagement that are ripe territories for the peace initiative in Southern Africa. Civil society groups like the Women Peace and Security Network Africa and South African Women's Movement stipulate that a peace initiative decreases the risk of gender-based violence. They recognize the following premises. Men are majority owners of small weapons and arms. The male gender dominates activities and professions and therefore have easy access to firearms. Men control decision-making, politics, and diplomacy. On the other hand, women are majorly affected by marital violence compared to men. According to the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, 1/3 of women murder cases relate to partner violence with small arms. Sexual violence coupled with armed intimidation leads to death. In crime and conflict settings, women tend to bear the heavy burden, both economically and psychologically, when their men get killed or injured. This is not to say that men do not bear that burden. As such, through the inclusion of gender perspective, civil society organizations advocate for policies, activities, and programs that will combat violence and promote the safety of all genders. The second case study is Mozambique, my home country. As has been spoken here, Mozambique has had its share of long periods of civil war, armed conflict, and political military hostilities where women, youth, and children constitute the largest target group of victims drastically affected and neglected in the post-conflict period. The Association of Human Rights and Development, DHD, an active member of ECOSOCC, is among the most dynamic CSOs in the region that fights to protect human rights and improve citizens' participation in the peace and development process through advocacy, capacity building, and networking. Curbing the armed conflict in Mozambique has been a paramount activity for DHD over the years. Recognizing that most of these victims used during and after conflict as human shields are women and children, this civil society organization, DHD, has purpose to coordinate a peacekeeping mission that encompasses civil society organizations, religious organizations, government, and the military wing of the opposition party in Mozambique. This resulted in a peace agreement and ceasefire, albeit for a short time. The efforts of DHD have expanded with a three-pronged mission, i.e., the economic, social, and political participation of women as agents of peace and contributors in the post-conflict process. In this and other similar contexts in the Southern African region, the regional CSOs believe that implementing the surrender and collection of illicit small arms and light weapons can go a long way to curb the perpetuation of the armed struggle and be a gateway to silencing guns in the region and all across the continent. Preventing, combating, and eradicating the illicit trade of small arms and light weapons necessitates the participation and representation of women in policy making and exploration of ways to promote women, youth, and children's safety right along with their male counterparts. The Community Violence Reduction Initiative is engaging and inclusive. From a gender lens, gender stereotypes are addressed and that inhibit the expression of masculinity related to strengths, domination, power, and control. Furthermore, the action creates gender balance and recognizes the meaningful representation and participation of women. Civil society organizations advocate for a collective effort by all stakeholders to combat the circulation of small arms and light weapons, as it is a vital mechanism for facilitating gender equality in peace and security issues. The illicit trade of ammunition and its unsafe storage is another concern for the regional CSOs. Amnesty International cautions that communities across Southern Africa are plagued with large deposits of ammunition, with it spread across state lines, amplifying the crime risk. Furthermore, a growing global problem arises from poor storage and transportation of ammunition. An incident can result in thousands of casualties and cause extensive damages to infrastructure, homes, and buildings. For security reasons, the locations of these particular places are not easily available. The scale of destruction outlines the need to address the circulation of ammunition to make the implementation of small arms and light weapons complete. The policy action that does not only, this policy action does not only ensure safe storage and transportation, but also combat the illicit manufacturing and trafficking of ammunition. In conclusion, civil society organizations have embraced the AU's peace framework because it has measurable goals. Also, it makes sense in the promotion of peace and security. eradication of poverty, creation of sustainable development efforts, human rights, cooperation within and among nations, as well as prosperity within the region and the African continent as a whole. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lindy, for the brief perspective on the civil society's implementation of the Amnesty Month regarding to Southern Africa. Now we have our last speaker, but not least, Ms. Martha Shumba.
Hello, everyone.
Hello,
can you hear me? Yeah,
yes.
I thought I should put the video on so that you can put the face to the voice. First and foremost, all protocol observed, I want to thank everybody who is here. I must say, I listen to each and every speaker, and I am very, very touched and appreciate the efforts from all angles to try and create the Africa we want, and by first and foremost, silencing the guns. My name is Martha Shumba, as the moderator said, and I'm on Youth on Peace and Economic Development. I run an organization that focuses. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Sorry, Ms. Shumba. We're going to give you 15 minutes.
How are you seeing these other days?
Oh, okay. I had heard some noises behind, so I thought it's coming from me. All right. What I wanted to say is I run an organization called the She Dead Foundation that is focusing more on the boy child and men in Africa. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is when we are silencing the guns, and especially speaking about illicit small guns and illegal firearms, you hardly find women carrying an illegal firearm. It is mostly the boys and men. And when we also tackle the issue of gender-based violence, it is also the men mostly are the perpetrators, and women are on the receiving end. So what I concluded was I can focus mostly on the source. So when we are busy silencing the guns, I would also like to suggest that we also put more focus on the men. As much as we want to protect our women, we need to also empower the men so that they can understand why we shouldn't have this kind of situations. And also looking at that on the some perspective, I got some statistics here that shows that 76% of suicide are men, and 70% homicide victims are men, 40% of domestic abuse victims are men as well. The men are the majority victims of violent crimes, usually men on men violent crimes. So why I'm highlighting all of this is as we move forward, let's not also forget to look into the reasons why we find ourselves in such situations where these young men are carrying guns all over. When I want to look back at what Nkosazana Ndlovu, and I think I'm right, where she said about the issues in South Africa and so forth. There's a lot of violent crimes. A lot of young people carry illegal firearms. They use them to commit crimes. When they get angry with their spouses, they go home, they shoot the women, they shoot the children. So when we look at all of this, it is important that we also look at the root causes of all of that. We have an angry youth. They are very, very, very angry, whether at the economic or social perspective, and also the politics, not being involved or included in decision making. We rally around as adults and speak about what the problems and challenges the challenges faced by young people without including the young people to ask them what do they think is the way forward. We've been preached many times about how they fought for our countries, how they fought for our continent, but without understanding our current situations, the guns that we need to silence, including poverty, including unemployment. We look at situations like the influx of immigrants that Nkosazana mentioned that also lead to crimes, black on black violence and xenophobia. As unjustifiable as it is, we should also need to engage the governments where all of these people, I might say, come from, to say there is need to be included when we are tackling such issues faced, especially in South Africa. I'm mentioning South Africa because it is kind of the capital city of Southern Africa when we talk about, the number of Africans who come to South Africa and so forth. So we need to also look at such issues to include those governments from political to economic issues faced in those home countries. And she also mentioned the issues of, there's no border securities and so forth. I don't think that's the issue. When you look at young people or any person who are coming from countries like Zim, they don't come here carrying guns. I can tell you that taxi owners in South Africa, they own a high number of unlicensed firearms. Sorry to mention taxi owners, but I'm just saying the taxi industry, that is where most of the shootings happens and so forth. So people go there and buy firearms. They criminal activities in their minds and so forth. But then when they come here, they find out it is well, you can get away with carrying a firearm and so forth. Can you still hear me? It's showing that my network. Okay, thank you so much. So when tackling those issues, we need to also look at the root cause in Southern Africa, identify those countries in Southern Africa that is more, where there are a lot of violent crimes. Because if we don't do that, we might end up having a situation where we blame each other. The problem is coming from here, the problem is coming from here. But no, at the end of the day, we don't have any solution at hand. So unity on this issue should come from governments, civil society, an ordinary person in any country. We should also come together. The other point that I want to highlight, especially looking at Mozambique, we have the rebels and going all around, doing all of those things that are happening behind that. Wherever there is such issues, we find out in Africa, there is an issue of minerals, there is an issue of land, there's an issue of some oil that was found here, some diamonds that was found here. And our governments and all leaders are failing or not wanting to address such issues. To say rebels don't just wake up and say, who is gonna give us arms? Who is giving them the power and the firearms? Who is supporting them? Who is financing them? So if we are silencing the guns in Africa, we also need to silence those perpetrators who are behind all of these things that are happening in Mozambique. We have all watched Libya going down the drain. It is an issue that we don't want to talk about. But is Africa united enough to silence the perpetrators behind the rebels? Or is it a calculative move? Do we have other leaders who are actually partnering in this kind of situations? If we have such kind of issues, we need to also put them on the table, because hiding behind the fingers and at the end of the day waking up to say, let's deal with this situation. But when we know most of the external, most of the stuff that are happening here, especially where rebels are concerned, are not our own doing. And we shouldn't undermine the statement that says Africans are peaceful. And another issue where also youth are concerned is the vulnerability of young people. Our economy is not stable. I'll give you an example of Zimbabwe. There's a lot of influx in South Africa because of the economic challenges facing in Zim. As Africa, or let me just say SADC, let's start it at home. If we come together to unite to assist Zim, what does Zimbabwe needs for its economic development? Forget politics. The economic development. If we created markets in SADC to make sure that whoever have a piece of land in Zim wants to grow tomatoes is allowed to go and sell it in South Africa, is allowed to sell it in Mozambique. Have we managed to do that? Because if we don't create markets, if we don't create solutions, especially economic solutions, we'll find ourselves with young people who are vulnerable. And when a man in briefcase comes and say, I have enough guns to turn against your government, they will wake up and they will do it. And at the end of the day, we say to ourselves, young people today, you know, they are not serious, young people today, but we created platforms, we created situations that makes them vulnerable. We have given them fake and temporary promises under a system that have made us hopeless and desperate. We found ourselves in other countries when we can actually build our own countries and spread it to the whole continent. We found ourselves, our own people in other countries, you know, being involved in criminal activities to make ends meet. We found our girls, you know, being the flowers of taverns and shabins, standing in the street corners, selling themselves. Have we come together to say, one of us is crying? I want you to act as if the house is on fire, because the house is actually on fire. You know, we showed that we are united back then and we are unstoppable. Can we just have the spirit of the Mandela, the spirit of the Mugabes, the spirit of all the revolutionaries be planted in our young people, not to turn against our continent, but to create projects, to create the enterprise culture, entrepreneurship programs, the right quality education to enhance our own economic development. Let us empower the next generation of leaders, which is young people. But by empowerment, we are talking about mainly economic empowerment to champion sustainable development, create platform for young people to engage in mental decolonization programs. Because if we don't do that, we always think that there is a higher power and a master that is better than me. So when that master comes with a briefcase, I'm more than willing to go. Lay out projects for permanent freedom. We have older people who say, I used to work at Bata, I used to work at ISCOM. That man is 76 years old. He has nothing, no legacy to show for it. Leaving young people, leaving children and grandchildren who are very angry. You know, I was looking at Sister John Roth's biography, who died at only 48 years old. As much as we don't like it, look at what he achieved. And a 40-year-old today, they are still saying we need jobs. That's the reality in Africa. We need to own our land, we need to own our minerals, we need to own everything. As long as we don't have that in our hands, it's not able for us to control the peace and security that we're talking about. Somebody else will come and detect and determine our way forward simply because they have the briefcase full of money, because they come and say we can build this in Africa. As long as we don't own that in our own hands, we'll always have the guns behind our backs. And guess who suffers the most? Our women and children. Our youth are vulnerable. the quality education that I spoke about, let's cultivate on that. That is pro-African, that allows us to build our own companies, not work for someone else and leave no legacy. We have this burning desire as young people. I've worked with a lot of civil organizations. Last year we did the campaign, which was in Africa and all over the world in fighting the sanctions imposed on Zim, of which some we take it so much lightly. And we also engage in many programs that we are teaching young people to grow their own food. And as we are telling these young people, you know, to surrender their firearms, to tell them that crime is wrong, we need to have a substitute. What are we substituting that for? Okay, I'm
Ms.
wrapping
Martha
up.
Shumba, you have one more minute. Can you wrap up?
Yes, let me just
Because we
wrap
still
up
have
on that. Okay, thank you so much for the platform. My last remark was that as we are encouraging the young people, especially young people, they carry the most firearms. As we are encouraging them to bring back the firearms, to end crime, to end gender-based abuse, do we have a substitute where crime is concerned? Do we have the programs? What are we doing for them to keep them engaged? Crime is like a drug. It will push you to do anything. So when the main briefcase comes and say, go and shoot this community, they'll plant bombs all over. I thank you.
Thank you very much for the well-fed information on the role of youth on peace and security. Thank you very much. As we are following our work program, we are going to the sessions of questions and answers. And there are a couple of questions that, since we are being viewed all over the world, across Africa, across America. So there's some questions that we're informed. We have the first question is, can amnesty be granted to someone who is not his or her country of birth, but with illicit gun obtained from his and her country of birth? And we have the second question. If so, what guaranteed that amnesty will be granted should one decide to surrender illicit gun in a foreign country? And we have another question. And after amnesty period, can those surrendered illicit guns be charged with any crime related to guns surrendered? And we have another question. How will SADC region commit to this amnesty? This question came from Mr. Molefi Ngogdi. And we have another question from, these questions are all to the panelists. And we have another question from Amara Jones to all panelists. What's some of the active guns in Africa that need to be silent? So I would like to ask each one of you to answer. We have 2 minutes each.
Okay, I think we can start with Mr. Gustavo.
Sorry. Hello? No, let's make it 5 minutes each, since there are a lot of questions.
Mr. Gustavo?
I don't know if everyone understood the questions, or would you like me to repeat it?
Repeat.
Did everyone, repeat the questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you repeat?
Okay, I'll kindly repeat. So we have the first question. Can amnesty be granted to someone who is not his or her country of birth, but with illicit gun obtained from his and her country of birth? Did everyone get that? The next question, if so, what guaranteed that amnesty will be granted should one decide to surrender illicit gun in a foreign country? That's question number 2. So the third question, after amnesty period, can those surrendered illicit guns be charged with any crime related to guns surrendered? That's the third question. We're going to the fourth question. How will SADC region commit to this amnesty? And we have another question from to all panelists. Like I said, what's some of the active guns in Africa that needs to be silent? I think those are really some deep questions. But I trust that, you know, this panelist is very powerful and we'll be able to answer all those questions. Thank you.
I think we can start with Mr. Gustavo, then Madame Petronella, and we'll move forward.
Thank you, Honorable.
Thank you so much. And I unfortunately have to leave to another commitment. So, but I thought those questions were very interesting. And I was, since Amara Jones posted this question around what some of the active guns in Africa that needs to be silenced, and that it's something that put me to think in terms of how do we actually describe the idea of silencing the guns. And I think that there is an important element around awareness raising and actually discussions around the very concept and thing, not as an academic exercise, but particularly because often when I talk to colleagues, whether here in South Africa or in others, which are places that are mostly talking around issues around silencing the guns, there is almost a very visual image that comes to mind around guns that are being seen, but not so much into the steps in which you need to take in order for guns to be silenced. And because it's important for us, especially in a month like now, that it's about the Amnesty Month, that is about illicit guns, is about small arms, to deal directly with the technical aspects of dealing with them, to about the physical elements around the guns. But if we don't create enabling policies, if we don't create enabling systems that enable those guns to be silenced, we're always going to see peace building processes as a bit of an event. An event is about disarmament. An event is about elections. An event is about something to happen physically that you can identify at one particular space. But the moment we start seeing that as a longer term process, and a process, I think, is the key word in there. When we start seeing that as a long-term process, and there is multiple elements that will enable the process to not be achieved as a point in time, but sometimes it's a bit of an ideal. And I think we will remember that originally we all were talking about silencing the guns by 2020, which of course is what was described within Agenda 2063. But 2020 for me has always been seen as this milestone, because peace in a way is something that we're always going to be looking for. And we started having a chat in the chat box a bit earlier around the idea of Southern Africa's peaceful condition maybe being a myth. And I actually don't see necessarily as being a myth. I think there is a lot of elements of resilience that we do identify in the region. Right. And I think that it's very important to see. But we cannot overlook what are some of those potential and existing sources of instability. Because by doing that and trying to identify exactly like a particular point in time, we didn't have peace yesterday, we have peace today, that we start just looking for peace as an event. And peace is a process, is an ideal at the same time, and sometimes it's just an activity. It's a multiple several things that should be part at very particular plan in which we were doing for the long-term responses. So I think that is important for us in terms of also changing the narrative in which we are calling our initiative around silencing the guns, that we're thinking about that as a long-term process that is not just about the technical aspects, because if we do that, we're going to start seeing our work as just being technical and not political and not long-term. So I thank you for that. I would like to thank very much for the opportunity, and I would like to interact with you, all of you, in the near future again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gustavo. And can Ms. Petronella answer another question, please? Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, before she comes in, can I please be excused for a few minutes? I've got to pick up one of my children from school and I'll be back shortly. Is that fine?
Okay.
All right, thanks.
It's
All right,
fine.
thanks. I'll be
Thank you.
back. I promise I'll be back. Thanks.
Or perhaps you want to go now, and then do you prefer to go now before Madam?
Do you want me to first take a question and answer it before I go?
Yes, it's better.
Okay, I will stay a little bit. It's fine.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right. Maybe I would like to tackle the last question. I'm not sure if I heard it properly, but I think the question was, what other guns are there to be silenced? Did I hear correctly?
The question is, what some of the active guns in Africa that needs to be silent? Thank you.
All right. My understanding, I would like to point at social media as another kind of gun that needs to be silenced. If you look at what has been happening across the continent, some of the hype that has been coming as a result of social media, it's created instability. And it's a very strong weapon that is actually working against us. And I believe that it's one of the things that needs to be silenced. Otherwise, more wars, more like conflicts will actually be created that are in the minds, but not in reality existing on the ground. So I think that we must also look at social media as one of the most deadly weapons that we need to make sure that it is silenced if you are to continue having peace within the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam, please, can you proceed?
Okay.
Sorry,
can we give Nkosazana? Yeah.
Can I get the question again that I need to answer quickly?
Can amnesty be granted to someone who is not his or her country of birth, but with illicit gun obtained from his or her country of birth?
Okay, sure. That's I'll try to answer that as best as I can. Okay, sorry. Can I go ahead?
Yes.
Okay,
please.
I'll try to answer that as best as I can. I think, firstly, the guns itself that have been bought by the perpetrator are illegal or illicit. So automatically, in my mind, legally, it disqualifies that person from. It's already an illegal gun. They have got to surrender it. But also now it is coming to in my mind that is what the point that's coming in my mind is the person themselves. If they brought in an illegal firearm, there's a strong chance that even they are an illegal immigrant. They came into that country illegally. So you have an illegal person and an illegal firearm at the same time. So to me, both of those are bordering on being criminal activities in terms of the laws of any country, both. So to address the question in terms of can the illegal firearm be accepted by the person who brought it to your country illegally? I would say, sure, that's an interesting question. I would say the amnesty is there to allow the process of people to surrender. That's why the amnesty is there. So that takes the fact that if they do bring it up, then obviously that grants them the amnesty. However, the question mark now that you may have to deal with is that person is already an illegal person themselves. So how do you rectify that? Do we say, okay, we are now aware that number one, you yourself are an illegal immigrant in this country, and will accept the firearm because that's why there's an amnesty process. So now how do you go ahead? Now that you've come up front and surrendered the firearm, let's now perhaps look at making you, even as a person, become an legal migrant in that country. So I'd answer it in that way. Obviously, if they don't surrender the firearm, then automatically, post the amnesty period, then automatically it becomes criminal because they are illegally there, and so is the firearm. So it's a matter of the timing. If they do come forward and surrender their firearm, then obviously they're granted the amnesty. While then the country looks at resolving the issue of them possibly being there illegally as well, because how do you bring in a illegal firearm if you're legal yourself? You know, so there's those question marks. So I think that's the best way to answer it. Obviously, if they don't surrender, they don't come forward, then that becomes criminal and must be dealt with by the respective country in terms of their laws, and let the law take its place. I'm not sure if anyone in the panel would like to add to my submission, but that's the best way I can actually think of answering it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone?
I just wanted to add something on what Madam Nkosazana has said. So as in the African Union, we want to encourage that process of the surrender and collection. And the whole African countries, the 55 African Union countries, adopted the amnesty month. So no matter where you are and the origin of your guns, illicit guns, you have immediately, once you surrender it during the amnesty month of September, you have automatically an amnesty which is granted to you. So you are not subject to any arrest. You are not subject to any prosecution. So you are not subject to anything. So you have a total amnesty. And we want also to launch this call to encourage people to surrender their arms to any state and designated institutions, and they can be sure that when they surrender it, they will have a total amnesty. They will not be subject to any prosecution.
Thank you, Honorable Stephane. I see a hand, Anne Odaudu, please. Yes, I see a hand.
While we wait for Anne, I'd like to add something to what Nkosazana said. I can see a situation where the person is not necessarily illegal. I have family in both South Africa and Mozambique, and I know I'm not unique in that sense. And I could see one of my relatives having an illegal weapon, that because they were born in South Africa and they moved to Mozambique, but they purchased an illegal weapon in Mozambique, or I'm sorry, they brought it from South Africa to Mozambique, or vice versa. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the person is illegal, but the weapon that they have is illegal. And I understand what Honorable Stephane was saying, and it makes sense to me that, you know, amnesty is amnesty. It's unconditional surrender and forgiveness, no questions asked. Because the moment you start asking questions, then you're putting some conditions to the issue, and that itself is considered illegal, right? Because you can't do that. It's either you are giving amnesty or you're not. And I wanted to talk to the issue of multilateral agreements. I think at some point, the governments of either SADC or other parts of Africa are going to have to come together and form some type of multilateral agreements where they're going to draft the terms of those agreements to say, okay, if someone comes from this country to this country and such a crime is committed or such a situation happens or amnesty is given for this particular issue, these will be the provisions for it, so that Mozambique knows what Zimbabwe knows, what South Africa knows, and what Malawi knows, etc., and Zambia and Angola. So everybody is in agreement with whatever has been discussed. And so all they need to do is go to the books and check things off, just like they have done with some other agreements. Our governments have had other agreements, such as allowing people to go from country to country as long as they have a passport and they stay so much time, they don't need to have a visa. So that happened as a result of agreements, multilateral agreements that the governments had. And so some of these issues that are being presented here, I think they can be sorted out by those government multilateral agreements.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lindy. Can we hear the voice of Isatini, Ms. Thandie? The floor is yours. Can we hear Ms. Thandie?
I am unmuting myself, thank you.
Oh.
I was about, I was raising my hand actually, but then I'm distracted. I'm also looking at time because I have a physical meeting at about 3, and it's about 40 minutes away from where I am now. Okay, so my point was on the amnesty for someone who could be maybe not in their land. What I wanted to say now was that the region, or probably ECOSOCC entirely, we need to sort of look to do some baseline studies to establish the facts behind this. Has it ever happened that a person will be given amnesty, but still there are restrictions because probably they are not in their own terrain? And probably what could be the cause of the person being in a position where there is a requirement now for amnesty? What kind of maybe, let's say, crime that could have been, most of the time is political, but without any case studies that we can borrow from and learn on how it happens and what could be the way out for future, because it doesn't look like Africa is getting out of crises per se. We seem to be going forward 10 steps forward and probably 20 steps backwards in everything that we are calling development, and also harnessing relationships among the populations of the continent, not necessarily for the countries, for each individual country. The case that Dr. Lindy has expressed of someone who will be legit in a country but will also bring in an illegal weapon is also an issue. What causes that and how can it be curtailed? So that's my contribution. Thank you. I know you wanted me to say something, so I've done it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And can we have Martha Shumba, Miss Martha, please? The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to add on to what somebody said regarding the social media. It's not just the social media, but media at large. And I must say, Africa, or the right people with the Pan-Africanism or pro-African mindset, do not own the media. So what end up getting out there is all the negative stuff. And we need to, as we are planning this, moving forward in silencing the guns, are we owning the media on social media? Are we sharing the information constantly as much as the other group that is actually supporting conflicts in African or in our communities sharing? Are we on that? Which radio stations or television medias are giving us airtime? Because when it comes to talking about the negative stuff that are happening in Zim or the xenophobia in South Africa, we are given all the airtime in the world to go and tell all negative stuff about the flies and Ebola in Africa. But we are not given airtime when it comes to sharing what can put Africa forward. So I would like to pitch this to all the leaders here, the AU as well. Let's push on owning the media ourselves. Let's also come together and partner with them.
Thank you, Ms. Shumba. We can DPO, Mr. Malisa. We give you 1 minute for wrap up. DPO, Mr. Malisa. DPO, Mr. Patson Malisa. Okay. Following the work program, we going to have the closing.
Sorry, moderator. Mr. Malisa
Yes.
had just sent a WhatsApp message to me because he's not feeling well. And
Okay.
he has taken too long to be taking things easy. He may have gone to sort of sort himself.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. May he get well soon. Thank you. Following the work program, we are going to the closing remarks, and with your permission, I ask the ECOSOCC secretary for the closing remarks. Thank you. Because we are running on time, and
I think I will speak on that behalf. So we want to thank you, everyone, for your brilliant presentation and making this to happen, because we need peace and security in Southern Africa and in Africa as a whole. So thank you very much. Thank you for all the participants, those who have asked questions, and to our panelists who have also answered the questions and have also give us guideline recommendation. We just want to ensure you that those recommendations will be included in the policy document that will be submitted to the Peace and Security Council in the end of October, and also to the General Assembly of Head of State and Government in their summit that will take place in December in Johannesburg. So be ensured that all your recommendations will be included in the policy document for the entire continent. Our peace caravan continue after we had North Africa, Central, East. Now we are in Southern. From tomorrow, the e-Caravan will go to West Africa, in which they will have also activities in their respective countries. And we will have a webinar next week, Friday, the 25th of September, in order to end the e-Caravan. And then on the 30th of September, we shall have a launch of a policy document, which will be submitted to the Peace and Security Council and also to the Assembly of Head of State and Government, so that we can make sure that those recommendations that we have proposed are to be implemented at countries level of each member state as part of our role, which is to advocate and to lobby. So we will issue that policy document to the attention of our government, our respective government in all Africa, and we will make sure that those recommendations becomes a working document to our national countries, and we will, as ECOSOCC, we will follow up on that and push for it to be implemented. So I want to thank you once again for your time, for your passion for peace in Africa, and we hope that it's not the last meeting that we will have together. We shall have more meetings in order to aid our input to the development of our Africa, and also to the peace and security with regards to Africa. I also want to thank the interpreter that has made it possible for French-speaking people to participate fully to the debate, to the discussion. So thank you very much, the moderator, for this good moderation that you can. And we want to applaud you for that and applaud our panelists for the job well done. So thank you very much, and as I did moderate.
Great panelists, yes, well done.
Thank you, Chairperson, and congratulations for the successful webinars.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we all say silencing guns by 2020?
Silencing guns
by 2020.
Silencing guns by 2020.
Yes, our voices have been heard.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
That brings us to the end of our webinar, and thank you once again. We continue with the sensitization for the Amnesty Month and the surrender of illicit arms. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Hey,
Bye.
thank you.
Thank you. Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.